Hi everyone, it's Alex, and today I'm here with Matt from MCS-books, and Matt and I are not strangers to doing something like this since we did a buddy read before. But I'm going to ask Matt if you would like. You can introduce yourself, introduce your channel.
Okie dokie. So my name is Matt. MCS-books. It's my channel. I feel like my channel's currently in a bit of like a weird sort of phase where it's kind of transitioning from what it might once used to be to what I perhaps want it to be. I think it's changing quite a bit. So my uploads are a bit hit and miss at the moment. Which is something. At the moment, I'm currently reading children's fiction, and I had expected to do more discussion videos on it, but at the moment it's just been 2 review videos. But I think my reading's quite mixed. It's literary fiction, translated fiction, I guess teen fiction, children's fiction at the moment. Predominantly fiction is what's coming up, and the occasional non-fiction, I guess.
I think it's even for this whole month in February that you've been reading, or at least focusing a lot on children's lit, which I prefer not to read because my mind propels out of my body and I can't concentrate whenever I read children's lit. But this is a good segue, actually. I know that you mentioned your channel feeling somewhat in a flux, or something similar to that effect. And I feel like on BookTube, those of people that know you, they always commend you for your sort of visual elements or your visual aesthetics of your channel. And I've always been curious, did you have any past hobbies before BookTube that sort of inspired that visual element to your channel? Or where did that come from?
No, I don't really know. When I first started my channel, I guess I wanted to kind of emulate the same kind of booktube videos that I was watching at the time. But when I was watching mostly the teen, well, not the teens, but the YA sort of side of booktube. And I think I made 1 video and then didn't post anything else for a year. And I was like, oh god, no, that's not really my cup of tea. So then I started just making the simple kind of basic booktube staples. But then when I was thinking about what sort of I want to do with my channel for the creative side, I was very much watching a lot of, I guess, I don't know what they are, like film side of YouTube. So I was watching a lot of film analysis videos because previously in my undergrad, at least, I did a lot of film studies, and I guess I've always been interested in cinema. So I think if you watch a lot of the film analysis videos, a lot of them are kind of the style that I was trying to go for. And I still want to go for that, but I think at the moment I'm just struggling as a way of translating that style to talk about books. Because when you're talking about films, you're basically using a lot of clips from films, and you're kind of going into discussion from there. So you kind of have a lot of the visuals already made for you, and then you could do some really nice editing. So like a few channels that I really like are, well, one of them is Beyond Ghibli, and they usually talk about Japanese animation, which is beyond just Studio Ghibli films. So that channel produces some videos which I really love, and they are able to kind of like focus on one sort of theme based on the film that they're analyzing. So I guess that's something that I had been thinking about on my channel, is that when I had read a book, if it had inspired a theme in me, then I would talk about that theme in relation to that book, and I would then kind of find visuals, or I would film visuals that I felt represented that theme in some way. So I guess a lot of the inspiration is, I guess, from more of the cinematic side, and then translating it into books, or on the bookish side. But yeah, I haven't done that for a while. Well, I guess a few months, I feel.
And all of that makes total sense. It never even occurred to me, because I also like to watch film-related channels, and it didn't even occur to me how, not reliant, but just how integral sort of the visual, like using clips from what you're talking about, how important that is for context, where I feel like when we talk about books on BookTube, obviously this sort of like a harder job because you have to describe the scene and then let the person watching imagine it. And then you also have to react or talk about it afterwards. An example I think of with your sort of cinematic sort of resources of thinking about a book that a lot of people can relate to. Perfect example, I think, is your Going Home in Harry Potter video, which I really love. And it was weird because I never even read the books. No one attacked me for saying that. But I did watch all of the movies growing up. And for me, watching the movies, I think of it very fondly because it reminds me of my childhood. It actually sort of leads to another one of my questions. I think children's literature in particular, I feel like there is that sort of fondness, or even sort of this romanticism of, like if someone finds out you like to read, I feel like one of the common questions they ask is, oh, what did you read growing up? Like, what did you read that really made you start reading? And I think that idea of children's literature being sort of the foundation of what you read in your whole life, I think is nice. But I feel like, for me, my version of a childhood book or my more formative years of reading is going to be in my 20s, because that's when I feel like I'm reading so much now and things that are like really important to me. So my question for you is, what do you think about people? Do you think children's lit can be romanticized? Do you think the books themselves are actually good, or is it the memory of the book that people attach to?
I think the romanticization of children's literature does happen. And I think it is a lot of times the emotion that we attach to a book is based on the memory of kind of that time. So, for example, the books that I was reading when I was a kid were the Animal Arc series by Lucy Daniels, the Animorphs series, and what was the other? I'm trying to think what other things I might have read. I read some of the Goosebumps books, and I didn't really like them. But kind of the things that, were the sort of series that you could just pick up and were kind of the same story retold, just with either different animals or different like journeys. But that you didn't really need that much investment in. You could read them out of order. You just knew it was a safe bet. So whilst I loved them as a kid, it's not going to be something that I don't think now, looking back on, I would ever want to pick up. Saying that, I did pick up the adult version of Animal Arc, which was interesting. But yeah, I think those sort of books, whilst I have fond memories of them, reading them as a child, they're not something that I kind of hold very dear to me or were very formative in my reading today. Because I think now the sort of reading that I would be going for is very different to the sort of reading I was choosing to do when I was a kid. Because back then it was more just a fact of reading about animals or reading about places that I wouldn't have been able to go. Whereas now I think it's more reading about the world at large and like actual people and kind of different ways of thinking, and like reading about experiences which are outside of my own experience, but also experiences which confirm my place within the greater picture, I guess. Going back to like romanticizing children's literature, I think it is very easy to do, but I don't think that in any way kind of takes away from the impact that reading children's literature as a child can have on you. Harry Potter books, even when I reread them, I think my appreciation for them is a different sort of appreciation to when I was a child, but I still value them as quite good books. I think they're very well written books and they're very well plotted books, and actually I think you can really tell the work that went into the whole series as a whole, and that's something I guess you can get with hindsight, which you wouldn't have had when you were first reading them. But yeah, when I reading children's literature this month, it's interesting because actually a lot of the books kind of still tackle a lot of the things that you're seeing in adult literature. It's just dealt with in a different way, or it's talking about different aspects of certain like themes and topics, more from a child's perspective. And I think that's really interesting. I read some really good ones, and they're probably ones that I wouldn't have ever picked up when I was a child. Mostly because they're a bit chunky for children's books, but they're still really enjoyable as an adult.
Yeah, I think children's lit is interesting. I think it's really complex, like thinking of marketing and audience wise, because I feel like children are becoming more complex too, where they want more mature stories. Because I feel like they're growing up faster because of social media or something. So this will sound creepy, but yesterday I was actually on your channel for a good few hours. Let's just say 3. That way I could like think of questions sort of inspired by your channel. But I remember when I started BookTube, it was around that era of sort of the small booktuber era where the whole monetization discussion and stuff. But I feel like I also found other things where you sort of talk about the presence of small booktubers and mainly about identity. Then you gave this wonderful, thorough observation of how small booktubers can sort of like what their mindset is while they're on this platform. And I was curious what you would think, but I feel like a misconception of people starting booktube is that they need something to make them interesting or to start thinking of their own brand or like what sets them apart. And of course, not to say that you were thinking of this. I feel like people think of you immediately when it comes to those visuals and like what makes your channel different and sort of sets you apart in your own way without consciously doing it. But do you think, really, where do you think that pressure comes from to be unique on BookTube of all places? Because I feel like our community isn't that kind of thing that really cares about trying to set yourself apart. And do you think there's any truth in that there's these factors that affect one's channel if they're hoping to grow it? Or if really growing it, does growing your channel matter in its own way? Because I have my own thoughts on that, but I'll let you speak first. And I realize I sort of asked 3 questions again.
I guess in a way, there's quite an existential issue with being with a capital B on BookTube, in that you're constantly having to be something, and you would hope that you are trying to be yourself, but because of the ability to edit and because of the ability to add visuals or add kind of things, you're really able to be anything that you kind of want to be. I think there is an idea that you should be perhaps pushing boundaries on BookTube or trying to be unique and trying to be something that other people will kind of find and attach to and enjoy. But I think the reality is that actually, especially when you're first starting out, the best thing to do is to kind of how to say, you should be sticking to sort of like the mainstream content, because that's the way people are gonna find you. Like if you go heads first into trying to do something completely different and trying to be something unique, I think it's very easy to then fall by the wayside. Whereas if you kind of establish yourself within the BookTube format, then it's a lot easier for people to find you, and then I guess from there your channel would naturally grow. It's a really tough one. I think, like I guess like many other people who are creating content online, I've had a lot of doubts. I've had a lot of queries as to whether I want to be doing it in a particular way, or whether I want to niche myself by doing one particular thing, and then what happens then if I've had a lot of the fears of what happens if I peak, because I think one of the first videos I did that probably was the most creative was oh god, what was it called, a small booktuber revolution or something like that, and that must have been probably this time last year actually. So I did that, and I think it got a lot of, that was kind of in as a part of all of this sort of small booktuber drama. I don't know, this like, whole demonetization drama thing. And then you had there was just a lot of reaction to it. And I think there was a lot of positive reaction. And then within that, you also had a lot of the kind of like the bigger booktubers, or the more established channels at least, who were beginning to kind of suggest that actually they had felt they were becoming a bit stagnant and wanted to do something else. So kind of my video was in relation to all of that was happening. But then as soon as I did that, and it got a fair amount of recognition, like within the comments and everything, and I was like, oh god, how am I ever gonna be able to do anything like this again? Because it was like a reaction to a one-time thing. It wasn't something that is like a sustained idea that can help me produce content from that one idea for X amount of months. It was just a one-time video gone up. And then I started doing things. I think from that I learned a lot of ways of editing. So I started doing things a bit more, kind of experimenting a bit. And then it happened again when I did the 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo review. And I think that was, again, it was a video that was very much inspired just by the book. And then it got a lot of positive feedback, and I was like, oh god, I've peaked again. How could I ever do another video that was like this? But then I did, because I did the Harry Potter. And I think since then I've kind of always been in this cycle of, oh god, what can I do to produce more creative content? Because I feel like whilst people acknowledge that my channel is very creative, at the same time it makes me feel like, oh god, I have to constantly be creative. And I'm like, but what if I don't really have time? Like recently I haven't had that much time to film, so I haven't been doing as much, because if I produce something, I want it to be of a decent enough quality in my standards, even though I know that a lot of people who regularly watch and comment on my videos don't care about half of that stuff. They're just happy to see me happy, and they're just happy to see me talking about books. But personally, I'm just like, oh no, I should be doing X, Y, Z. I should be making more creative videos and things. And it's tough. You've got to find balance of choosing who to be, but then being able to understand that you can be many things at once, and it still represents a version of you online.
Well, for me, I feel like whenever I kind of have like a good archive of videos where people can sort of understand who I am bookish wise and like how I approach books. But now I feel like I could maybe make a video where I can just talk about something, and I would think people are watching me because now they know me by now. But I can definitely understand where people just starting out wondering what their first or second or like first 5 videos are going to be. It feels very daunting because you're asking people to watch you even though they have no idea who you are other than your interest in books. And even then, like, it depends what type of book you read. If that person watching's already read your book, or the book you're reading, if it's new releases. So I'm just so curious about the layers of booktube. And I feel like really what it is, the people, when I sometimes look at the booktube newbie tag, I think they're very young. I think maybe late high school, early college maybe. And then I think the perspective is changing how I never see YouTube, and I still don't, as a social media. I still think of like Instagram and like Twitter, it's that stuff. But like talking to my 12-year-old cousin the other day, she, like, I would be like, wow, who'd you put as your man crush Monday on Instagram? And she's like, I don't have Instagram. No one does. And I'm like, yeah, me either. I think it's a part of it is realizing that there's so many other voices on BookTube, and it's not just your one voice. And I think that sort of makes people feel smaller, which can be accidentally really existential whenever you realize like you're technically speaking into a void. Even when I upload this later, I mean, we know we'd have this conversation, but technically speaking, like, no one could ever watch it. But then I guess it would be wondering, like, why are you making videos in the first place? And I guess that's why a lot of people may choose to leave. But not to say that just because you're not doing anything on BookTube doesn't mean you don't really like to read or that you don't have anything to say. It's just a lot of it is time, like editing or sitting down and getting life stuff out of the way too. And this actually brings me to another question about the idea of like filming and stuff. But I feel like one of the pressures of booktube or just filming is that a lot of people struggle with anxiety, whether it's like finding they have something worth saying or just being on camera or just talking out loud.
Yeah.
So the anxious feeling on booktube, how do you think people can overcome that?
I don't know, like for me at least, in the probably past 4 or 5 months, I've been really struggling with my own form of anxiety. But then the anxiety that I have isn't like a social anxiety in any way. My anxiety is very much it's a health related anxiety. It's that I always think I'm going to be dying and then I get myself into like this whole tiz about it. And then I guess a few months ago I had like a really bad panic attack while I was walking home. And I had no idea where it came from or why it happened. And then I think a lot of it was all I was under a lot of stress and under a lot of pressure, and it was all kind of forming in my shoulders and in my neck, and like that's like the worst area. So then whenever I feel the most anxious, I kind of then cut all forms of like social media. I like seldom reply to messages. I don't like tweet as much, or I don't respond to people as often, and then I feel guilty about that. But it's just who I am, what I do. And I think that's interesting in that actually booktube for me is a way that, because like you said, I didn't feel that YouTube is a social media in that you are just talking to yourself, and I find that a lot easier because there's no pressure if I'm making a video that I have to talk to anyone and kind of like explain to them, oh, this is what's going on with me. And I know it sounds really silly, but all of this sort of stuff. But then when it comes to, but I do feel that YouTube then gives you the opportunity to become more social. And I've made a lot of friends from booktube, which I talk on various channels. And then when it comes to buddy reads, I think that's another aspect of booktube becoming like a social media, and that you can reach out to people and stuff. Trying to think, because I've only done a buddy read with Ollie and Emma, and that was like my first buddy read, and then I did buddy read with you, and that's kind of like all the buddy reads I've done. I think actually when I was doing one with Ollie and Emma, we were using Voxer, and it was really nice because there was the capacity for it to be quite instantaneous in that you're sharing voice memos and you're talking, and it can almost be talking at real time, as if it was like a phone call, but it's not. But then at the same time, we were all reading at different times, and then we didn't feel obliged to respond or listen to one of the messages straight away. So then, for example, I think Ollie, he was busy at a certain time, so he hadn't read X amount of the book. But then whenever we talked about the book, we would always like kind of say before, like, oh, we're going to talk about these 2 chapters, and then leave the voice memo. So if you didn't read those, you didn't have to listen. So there's a lot of ways that I think if buddy reads are left open, there's a lot of ways for it to actually work for any kind of social person, however they choose to interact with it. If there's strict rules that, somebody is expecting of you to fulfill, I personally, I don't think I would be able to cope with that, because as soon as somebody implies that there's some sort of like structure, I'm just like, oh god, no, if I don't get to choose the structure, I'm not going to do it. So I don't know, because like when you and I did it, it was nice because it was just, we would read however much we wanted at whatever time we wanted, and then just leave like a paragraph on Goodreads to each other. And then there was no, I didn't feel like I then had to read that part straight away in order to feel, because it was still there, that your thoughts were still there, and I could access them when I wanted and when I felt like I needed to. And I don't feel like either of us would have been particularly annoyed if the other person hadn't replied for a few days, because I feel like at least a lot of the people I interact with on booktube will have a very similar mindset, and I don't feel like a lot of a lot of the people that I will be socializing with are going to be or they're going to be more laid back with these sort of things. I don't know how it is for everyone, because I know, of course, there are going to be some people who might prefer a more structured routine because it makes it easier for them to actually know what to do and when to do it and stuff. But I think you just, you got to, expectations are tough, and you just got to kind of lay it all out before you go into something. Like, hey, I'm more than happy to do a buddy read with you. This is kind of like what I expect. Are you on the same page? And if they're not, then you'll be like, oh, maybe we can just both read the book at the same time, but not have it so strictly a buddy read. We can just talk about it when we've both finished and something like that. Like, I think you have to lay down groundwork first in order to handle expectations that might be put upon you, which might make you then anxious or something, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's all very true, and while still being considerate to your potentially buddy reading with, because I know for me, I'm that person that like just feels anxious when I have to wake up and check my emails for work. But yeah, with buddy reads, I guess one example I could think I guess someone could do is sort of similar to like what we did, but maybe just with like a lot less correspondence, where you read the book, you probably gave yourself a month, and then you guys just both chose to upload a video together on the same day on booktube or something at the end of the month, and then you just happen to mention like, I read this at the same time as Matt, and here's a link to his video. And then I guess the real correspondence would begin in each other's comments. We're like, oh, that's so funny that you thought of this, and then the whole month I thought about this part in this book. Yeah, I think it's weird because people, I think, see booktube as like this haven of introverts where like we're all just anxious people all the time. I have only a couple of questions here left, Matt, and I feel like these will be much easier questions perhaps. But the first one I'll ask is, you work at a bookshop, so has anything weird happened? Because I've worked in retail before, and strange things have always happened. But what's the strangest thing to your memory? Whether it be a really weird book request, just something. What's a memory from working at a bookshop that you can give the inside perspective about that people might be wondering?
I'm trying to think of a really weird thing that's happened. I had a woman who I can't remember what happened, but basically she was asking me for something, and she was very rude from like the get-go, and I was quite busy, and it was just me, and there was a queue of people, and I was being as polite and as helpful as I possibly could. Perhaps I often wear my heart on my sleeve, so I have been told by my colleagues sometimes that when I think I'm being pleasant, my face is perhaps not. But she wanted something, and I was like, I really can't help you with this because this book has been out of print for X amount of years. And I was like, so there's no way that we'll be able to get it unless we perhaps, if some of our customers, we live in quite a town full of old people. If some of them aren't very internet literate, we can order books online from them. But then what we have to explain is that in order for it to kind of help us as a business, we actually then have to charge like a handling fee and things, which then makes the price perhaps not what they expected it to be. So I was like going through all of this and stuff, but she didn't want any of this. She didn't want it to come from online because she didn't know where online was. This whole like, I don't know where that is. Like she didn't want to give us any contact details in order to contact her if the book did come in and whatnot. So I was just like, there's really nothing I can do for you. Like, it's not here in the shop. You don't want us to order it in. I'm sorry. So and then she I couldn't tell whether she was joking or not, but she was just like looked me like dead in the eyes. She was just like, I really don't like you. But she said it in not like a really malicious way. She said it in just a very normal way. I didn't know what to react. So I just said thank you. And then kind of like turned to like to help another customer. And she just sat down like next to the till and just stared at me for like a good few minutes. And then the other customers were really awkward. I was like, I don't know what's happening. Like, Please get this woman out of the shop. I think I'm the sort of person that kind of just takes anything as it comes, and then I'm probably the weirder one in the shop. So.
All right, Matt, the final question I have is actually a question from Ollie, because I've been asking who I interview to sort of ask another question for my next victim, which is you. And then Ollie asked, what was your biggest learning curve on BookTube that you feel like when you started out, which you've sort of touched on, like context clues throughout this whole video, but what would you say is your biggest learning curve?
It was probably editing for me, because of course that's something that I enjoyed, but I didn't really know much about from the start. So it's something that I kind of picked up as I went along, but also the fact that when I pretty much do everything for free. So I film on my phone, edit on the free software on my Mac, which is iMovie, and because of that, there are a lot of limitations because you're not paying for it, like to have everything at your fingertips. So my biggest learning curve is, I'm sorry, my cat's meowing in the background. It's gonna
Oh my gosh.
I can show you. He's a grumpy little push.
Okay, so I actually have another question. What's your cat's name?
It's Leo.
Leo.
Ginger one. Leo the puss, the grump fluff. And then our other cat is called Poppy, and she's the cute one. Where was I? So learning curve, the editing. Because of the limitations on iMovie, I had to then learn how to translate what I wanted to happen in the editing process, and that was really fun. That was a really lovely learning curve because I was able to. I use I don't know, the presentation software on the Mac to do a lot of the editing, which I can't do on iMovie, and then kind of figuring out how to get the best effects from both of these different softwares was a really great process, and I really value that and appreciate that. So that would be that.
Questions here. What would be the next question or what would be a question you would ask my next person?
Question I would ask the next person: why did they say yes to doing an interview with you?
Oh, that's a really good one.
But also, it would be nice to know kind of what they might expect from the from like the talking. Like what do they think they might be having to talk about, or what do they hope to kind of put out there whilst they're talking? It'd be really interesting.
Yeah. Did you like wake up today and you were like, oh gosh, Alex could be asking me anything today? Like, I don't know. If I asked you like, who's a booktube are you? Hey, and it's awful.
So I didn't have. I think I was pretty much aware of the sort of questions you would ask, mostly because I watched your video with Ollie, so like I knew you probably wouldn't veer too much from that sort of like open-ended questions which you want to kind of like get decent conversation about. I didn't really know what sort of topics you might ask about, so like it was a pleasant surprise to be able to talk about the children's literature, but I think I trusted the sort of things that you probably would ask, just because I feel like I've got to know you well enough over the however many months that I've been watching you on BookTube, that I trust you to not ask anything too weird or odd, unless you were tipsy, of course.
Yeah, that's true. Matt, that's everything I have. So, yeah, thank you so much for interviewing with me. This is Matt from MCS-books, a wonderful BookTube channel. Go subscribe, go like, go comment. So, all that good stuff. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.